What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. We are continuing our exploration of the steps and how they relate to promoting and helping us develop what we're calling an authentic self-esteem, a self-esteem that's based on humility, and how that helps us achieve this practice of emotional sobriety we've been talking about. The last several weeks, we've started to explore step 4. The 2 weeks prior to this one, previous 2 weeks, Herb went into some detail about how he approaches step 4 in his 12-step workshop, year-long workshop that will be coming up in January. And I'm sure there will be a link to that in the chat box. And if you have not done Herb's workshop, join it. If you have done Works Herb Shop, join it again. People that go many, year after year say every year they get more and more out of it. So I encourage you to participate in that. What I'm going to do tonight is I want to start introducing you to the idea of an emotional sobriety inventory. And I want to put it in context in terms of step 4. And I think Bill Wilson does a great job with this towards the end of that chapter. I want to read to you this paragraph that he has, and then I'll go ahead and show you this inventory. Bill said this. He says, "But it is from our twisted relations with family, friends, and society at large that many of us have suffered the most. We have been especially stupid and stubborn about them." Now, to me, when Bill says we're stupid and stubborn about them, it means that we've been self-righteous, that when things go wrong, we almost automatically believe it's somebody else's fault, and that we have not developed any kind of a practice where we take a look at ourselves in a way to see what's going on. How am I creating this experience that I'm having in my life? We get stupid and stubborn because it's very difficult for us to see that we might be wrong about some of these things. And so even when we're wrong, we get real good at defending, and trying to defend ourselves as being right, even though a part of us knows we're wrong. I mean, that's how twisted and crazy things become in our life, because we have this idea that somehow if I'm wrong, if I'm less than what I think I should be, you're not going to love me. So many problems are created with that lack of humility. It's amazing. Bill goes on to say, the primary fact that we fail to recognize, once again, the primary fact that we fail to recognize is our total inability to form a true partnership with another human being. Now, what we're going to be looking at is that it is impossible to form a true partnership with another human being when you are emotionally dependent on them. It cannot be a partnership. It will, out of necessity, be a very one-sided deal. You will want that relationship to be on your terms, and for that person to function in the way you want them to function. You cannot have a true partnership when it's that lopsided. A true partnership means that there are room for both people. What we say in a healthy relationship, there's room for two. There's room for me and there's room for you. There's room for all of me and there's room for all of you. But when a relationship is based on emotional dependence, there is no other in it. It's all about what I want. He goes on to say, our egomania digs two disastrous pitfalls. And they're really the same thing. And you're going to see that. They're just different sides of the same coin. Either we insist upon dominating the people we know, or we depend far too much on them. Dominating them means that we're going to get them to do what we want them to do so that we feel okay. And depending on them means we're hoping they're going to take care of us to make us feel okay. You see, they're both based on emotional dependence. Either we insist upon dominating people we know, or we depend upon them far too much. If we lean too heavily on people, they will sooner or later fail us, for they are human too and cannot possibly meet our incessant demands. Doesn't say needs, but our incessant demands. You see, a need, if I go to you with something I need, it's not a demand. Hey, I'd really like this. Are you available for this? This would mean a lot to me. And when I take my need to you, it's a request. And you get to say no. But when I take my need to you and it's a demand, if you say no, then it's not okay. I either become devastated or I try to shame you and make you feel terrible that you're not meeting my need. There's no acceptance in that at all. In this way, our insecurity grows and festers, right? Because if I depend on the other person, they're not meeting my needs, I get more anxious, I get more insecure because I'm living this idea. The big lie is that I need you to treat me a certain way for me to be okay. You see, that's the emotional dependency underneath it. When we habitually try to manipulate others to our own willful desires, they revolt and resist us heavily. Then we develop hurt feelings, like they've rejected us. But they haven't rejected us, we've rejected them, because we're not treating them as a subject, we're treating them as an object. Then we develop hurt feelings, a sense of persecution and a desire to retaliate. We're going to get even. How dare they, right, do that to us? As we redouble our efforts at control and continue to fail, our suffering becomes acute and constant. This is the tale of emotional dependence. This is what it does. He says, we have not once sought to be one in a family, to be a friend among friends, to be a worker among workers, to be a useful member of society. Always we tried to struggle to the top of the heap or to hide underneath it. This self-centered behavior blocked a partnership relation with any one of those about us. Of true brotherhood, we had small comprehension. So our task is if we're going to develop a practice of emotional sobriety, to be able to identify our emotional dependence and how that shows up in our interactions. And it's very important that we get down to specifics. Bill described it in a very general way here. I'm going to show you how we can get down to specifics and start to dig into this, some of this stuff in our life. So you guys can see this form, I trust. Let me blow it up to the whole screen. There we go. Tom, is that visible to everyone? Tom Potash, is that visible to everybody?
It's smaller than it was.
Can you make it bigger?
So it was bigger before.
Correct.
Wow, that's interesting. Hold on one second. Because that made it really big for me.
It looks fine on my screen. I don't know.
Oh, it was okay?
It was
It
for me, it was, but it seems
It's
like
okay for me
it's
too.
small.
It was better. The first one was much better.
Yeah, but I think this is much better for most people. So if you can download the PDF, you'll be able to see it. So let me go through this, and please mute yourself. Tom, can you make sure everybody's muted?
Yep.
Thank you. So this is the emotional sobriety inventory. I first published this in my first book, The 12 Smart Things to Do When the Booze and Drugs Are Gone. And then in my most recent book, The 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety, I revised it, and this is the form that it's in, I believe, in the book today. So let's go through this and let's see how you use this. So your first step, and Bill says this in the 12 and 12 and in other ways in other material that he's written, he says it's a spiritual axiom that every time that you are disturbed, he says, no matter the cause, every time you're disturbed, no matter the cause, there's something wrong with you. I've modified that a little bit. I like the word, there's something off with you. I don't necessarily call it wrong, because I don't think our emotional dependency means that we're pathological. It just means that we're stuck, we're arrested in our development. So we just have to take the next step in our development is what's happening here. So the first step is to be able to describe what happened to you without interpreting it and drawing conclusions from it. What might that sound like? Well, I used this one example in the first time I wrote about this in 12 Smart Things. This gentleman I was working with, he came home from a meeting and he had received a 6-month chip. And as he walked in the door, his wife, and this is how he wrote about it. I walked in the door after going to my meeting on, I think it was Wednesday nights. And my wife was sitting there and she was on the couch, as she usually is on Wednesday night, just finishing up watching Bones. And I walked in the house and I said, honey, I got my 6-month chip. She turned to me, looked at me, and then looked at TV and said, so what? That's what happened. So that's just describing the event, not talking about what it meant, not getting into why she did this or any of those ideas, not even talking about how he reacted to it yet. He's just going through what he did, what she did, and what happened. After she said, so what? He stomped up the stairs and slammed his bedroom door. And he started to think, well, I'll show her, so what? I'm going to go down the street and buy a 6-pack of beer. Let's see how she feels about that. Then he had a second thought about it and said, you know what? That's going to be hurting me. It's like me drinking poison to get at her. I'm not going to do that. I'm just not going to talk to her. Screw her. So we call it the emotional cutoff. He stonewalled her for the next several days. That's the first column. It's very important to be very, very specific when you do this. I would encourage you to do it for the next couple weeks as we're talking about this every time you're disturbed, because the goal here is to become aware of your emotional dependence and how it's showing up in your life, right? And I think that this way of approaching it is a very good way for you to amplify your awareness, to increase your awareness. Second column, what you next write about is your reaction. How did you respond to this? Well, he got very, very upset to her. What did it mean to him? It meant that she didn't care about his recovery, that she didn't care about him. He took it very, very personally. So he felt like, my God, my marriage is really threatened here. She's fallen out of love with me. I'm not important to her anymore. We're on the verge of divorce. And he became very anxious and at the same time very angry about it. Because there was a part of him that was saying, my God, look, I put this effort in, I got 6 months and she doesn't recognize it. How dare she? She complains all the time when I'm doing something wrong. How come she can't give me credit when I'm doing something right? Now, the third column, and this is very important because you see in Bill's letter, and even what Brian wrote today or read today, what Bill wrote was that every disturbance we have, great or small, if we really explore it, we are going to uncover an unhealthy dependence and its consequent demands. And that's what these columns 3 and 4 are meant to do. But I flipped it around because I find it's better to find out what your demands are, your expectations are, and then you can back into what your emotional dependence is. So identify your expectations. So to identify the underlying expectation, you can complete this sentence. What they should have done, or what was supposed to happen was, so for him, what she should have done is when he walked in the door, she should have jumped up, ran to him. You got 6 months, my God, honey, this is just so great. I'm so proud of you. Keep it going. This is fantastic. This is fantastic for our family that you're sober. So what was his expectation? That she should celebrate him and be his cheerleader. Now, what was his unhealthy dependence? Now, by the way, when you identify your expectation, you're also going to become aware of that it's all about you. You see, that's what we start to get in touch with, just like we talked about last time, that when we do our initial take at the 4th step, we start to see just how much it was about us, how self-centered, how selfish we are. We make everything about us. I think it's a problem that is generated in our culture. This is a culture based on narcissism. It promotes it. It's all about me. It's all about my personal importance. So when he said this and he talks about what his expectation was, you see there's no awareness of what that 6-month-ship meant to her. His only awareness, and this is what happens when we make things about us, is we lose sight of the other person. We have no empathy for them. He expects her to be empathic with him, but he's not giving her any. Now, on further, you guys don't know this, and this is part of the story that comes out. This is the 3rd time this guy got a 6-month chip. So she wasn't about to jump on the bandwagon again and set herself up for disappointment. Now, I think she could have dealt with that and talked about that in a different way. And I'll give you an example of what she could have done differently. But if he would have held that in his awareness and he walked in and she said what she said, instead of him getting mad, he would be understanding. He'd say, God, you know, it's got to be hard for you to get excited about this. This is the 3rd time we did it. You know, honey, I hope it's going to be different. And I know that may be hard for you to hope for that right now because I've disappointed you so many times before. Oh my God. That's what emotional sobriety looks like, by the way, folks. Functioning in that way, using an awareness of what's going on in the situation and dealing with it appropriately. You know, it's once again, reality is reality. It's how we cope with it that counts. If he would have done that, he would have walked upstairs feeling good about himself. And instead of his demand now alienating him from his partner, his empathy would have connected him to her. But you got to be pretty damn aware and emotionally mature and emotionally sober to pull that stuff off. What was his unhealthy dependence? The unhealthy dependence, you know, that was underlying his emotional reaction, unenforceable rule. The unenforceable rule is she should celebrate what I do regardless of what it means to her. That's the unenforceable rule that he had. What his unhealthy dependence was is that his effort was dependent on her. He had what we call a need for other validated self-esteem. He wanted her to validate him so he could feel good about himself. So he put himself in this one down position. He was says, "Mommy, tell me I'm a good boy." Well, you can see what a mess that makes. So these demands, what Bill said is we know nothing of a true partnership. We alienate those people with them. And so this is as far as I want to take this tonight. Next week, we're going to talk about how to claim your emotional autonomy. But I want to ask my colleagues to join me and discuss this, and then we'll open this up for you guys to share some of what you're aware of about your emotional dependence. Let me stop sharing. And let me invite Roger and Herb into the room with me. There's Raj. Good evening, Roger.
Hey, Alan. Good evening, man. Good evening.
Good
Hey,
evening.
Herb.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Hello there. I'll go ahead and kick off if that's all right with you, Herb.
Sure, great.
Okay. Love the example you gave, Alan, because just step by step by step, I think it really clearly lays out the contrast, right, between a more emotionally sober way of responding to that situation and one that's based on, unhealthy dependency. And, as I hear you say it, it's like, who cannot relate to this, right? In terms of the unhealthy behavior, right? In terms of the excessively emotionally dependent behavior, that desire, and again, it's not about making myself wrong, that whatever shows up in me. That desire for that kind of validation, that desire for that kind of, isn't that great? To me, it's completely understandable. But your example makes so clear that if I'm lost in that, if that's all I'm aware of, but I'm not grounded in, as you put it, the bigger picture, I'm not grounded in humility, is another way to say it. Right? I'm grounded in that view that you mentioned, whether I want dominance over the other person or I want them to, meet my needs. I want them to take care of me, that they're two sides of the same coin. And I agree with that. I think they manifest quite differently. I think the emotional dependency piece in terms of approval seeking and so on looks and feels quite a bit different than the dominating or really aggressive or controlling behavior. But they all have the same elements: viewing other people as objects, attempting to manipulate and control other people so that I get the experience that I want. And the gentleman in your example who got his 6-month chip is an example, a great example of wanting to be validated in that way. So I was reading a couple of months ago, I was reading an article about communication. And the guy whose name escapes me right now, he said, if you want to clear up a lot of the trouble that goes on in communication, he said, use this formula. So this is a formula, right? Which means it has all the problems of a rigid formula. But he said, if something happens that upsets you, limit yourself to this statement. And it follows along with what you're laying out. He said, when you say or do X, I notice I felt Y. That's it. When you said or did X, I noticed I felt Y. You don't say another word at that point. You don't mind read what the other person's intentions or motives were. You don't blame yourself or you don't blame the other person. You don't make the other person responsible for what you're feeling. You just describe what happened objectively and what your experience was. And he said, if you want to clear up 95% of what goes wrong in communication between two people, you talk about that. And then the piece I would add to that, following you, Alan, is you talk about what you want in addition to that, or what you would like to have happened, but still without blame. To me, the detail in which you lay this out through all 5 of these steps will rule out 99%, right, of what goes wrong. Why we don't have that sense of being on the same level as, connected, a family member, right? A partner. So I think it's a great tool, man, is really what I want to say, Alan. But what I almost always finish with is wherever we are in that process is okay, right? Wherever we are in that process is okay. That's where we are. We're not supposed to be someplace else. Most all of us arrive at adulthood with a lot of unresolved issues from our upbringing, as did our parents and their parents before them. I like the point of view that says a centerpiece of the purpose of our life is to create as much resolution and as much healing as we can with whatever those issues are. And this 5-step process that you lay out, and Herb, everything you laid out in these last 2 weeks particularly, that's what that's about, is healing those wounds and taking responsibility, to tie it into Brandon's self-esteem concepts a little bit, taking responsibility for healing those wounds. So I'll stop at that point, but thank you, Alan. It's an incredibly valuable tool.
Yeah, what I was just going to build on, piggyback on, is that statement about I noticed when you did X, Y, and Z, I experienced or I felt this. You see, one of the values of something like that is to describe your reaction rather than react to it. See, Dan Siegel calls it name it. If you're going to, right? Is if I say, I notice I'm starting to get angry. With what just happened, I noticed that with what you just said, I'm starting to get really mad about it. See, when I do that, I can start to create a little bit of a pause. I create a little separation from my reactivity. And we know, and we'll keep talking about this, is the more I can create that space between what's happening and my reaction, the more I have a chance to bring the best of me to the scene of more thoughtfulness and an awareness of you and me, not just an awareness of what I want and what's going on with me, because so oftentimes when I make it all about me, not so often, every time when I make it all about me, I lose sight of you. It has to happen. My consciousness can't hold an awareness of you if all I'm doing is focusing on what it means to me. So what we're really doing is that we're really seeing that self-esteem, right, embraces an awareness of self and others. Brandon talks about this. He's very clear about this, is that the only way to function better in your life is to use both sources of information when you're dealing with a situation. So we'll continue to talk about this, but I really like what you underscored here, Raj.
Thanks, Al. Herb.
Thank you. Oh my, there's so much here. Recently, I've been very impressed with how people are not very thinking. They're not very reflective. They're not very prone to take responsibility. I mean, it's an awful dynamic. I'm becoming very aware that that's the work that we do. I mean, the 3 of us can sit here and talk about like we just do and we've done many times, but there's very few people that are conscious to that level and self-reflective and taking responsibility to that level. And so I've become very, very conscious in the last couple of days because of an incident I had that I need to really slow it down. I really need to not expect people to understand what I'm saying. It's like I had a I'm going to share the story because this is very relevant, I think. I'm working with a group of vets that are damaged from alcohol, drugs, emotional challenges, as well as PTSD. And there's about 100 of them in a recovery unit. And so I'm going to help them with my work and my step process, and I make presentations. And we've had about 4 or 5 meetings now, and they've warmed up to me. But this last time we were talking about step 2, and oh my God, I got such pushback and challenges and negativity, and it was like overwhelming. And I came away just, don't they want my help? Oh my God. I mean, why don't, and so I paused and I looked at what's going on here. And I'm really disturbed that they just didn't love me, and they didn't wow, Herb, wow, thank you for sharing your questions and your experience. And oh my God, we want what you have. No, they were about to tar and feather me. And it was like, okay, Herb, number one, they're in a recovery place that is a Christian-based place. Number one. And I have been explaining step 2, like I do with people, very sensitive to the pushback on
God.
on God, and so I use really broad terms and very inclusive terms, and these people are having a fit, and they're quoting the Bible. They've got the Bible in their goddamn hands, and it's kind of like, oh my God, I forgot who I was talking to and where I was talking to, and I was giving them the broadest environment to pick, to have an experience, and they thought I was a witch doctor.
Yeah.
And so I had to stop, pause, to take responsibility for it, and realize that there's a lot of people with a lot of either misinformation, no information that they're very attached to. And most people that I'm dealing with in my workshops, they're not used to thinking.
Yeah.
No, they're used to feeling, and they're not used to taking responsibility. They're used to blaming. It's not their fault. I mean, I know that because that's who I was. But I think I've gotten too fancy and too complex. I think I just really need to bring it much more into digestible pieces. Well, there's so many things I want to say here, but so I need to adjust to reality, not have them reality adjust to me.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, you said it in one way that was so interesting. Sometimes we forget who the audience is that we're speaking to.
100%.
And look, if anyone could speak to where they're at with the program, had you not gone the way you typically go to make it more generic, and I know why you're doing it, and I've seen the value in it. But with this group, they need the monk. They just want the monk.
Or just the talk from the big book, because the big book
that's
talks about God and higher power,
Well, that would. I mean,
and I don't have to apologize for it.
No, see, that's it. See, just that part of that. See,
Yeah.
it's so interesting, but we get this idea about how it should be, how we should be, and how they should react. It's so true. I appreciate you sharing that so much, Herb. But it's the, I know the dilemma you're in, because you really were coming from a place of wanting to be helpful. I mean, clearly.
I want to give them a new experience, but they're not up for a new experience.
No, they're not going to get a new experience. They were going to tar and feather you is what they were going to. That's the new experience they were going to have.
They put together the rifle squad. Anyway, I think that's relevant to what we were talking
Oh, it's totally relevant, man. I've been in that situation. I went, I was part of Dr. Kempler's international training staff, and I went to Holland to do a training group. Maybe Roger, you've had an experience with this too. Usually groups are very receptive of me. I'm able to interact. There was this one person in this group that just could not stand me. And every few words out of my mouth, she just would challenge me left and right. And at that point, I was still pretty new. And my experience, and I didn't know how to handle it. I was overwhelmed, and my God, I was hurt, and all these other expectations I had.
Mm.
And I contrast that because I went and did a workshop for a group of NA guys up in upstate New York.
Mm.
I was warned when I was going to do this workshop, don't talk about alcohol. Don't talk about alcoholism. These guys are drug addicts. These are hardcore NA guys from the Bronx.
Mm.
So I get up to talk about Bill Wilson's emotional sobriety. Well, obviously I got to talk about Bill's an alcoholic, right? I mean, so I'm talking about, and there's one guy in the back, and just the same experience. Every few things
Mm.
that I said to him, he took me on and was struggling with me.
There it is.
And what I didn't do with this gal that I did with this guy really well, I stopped and I said, look, I can sense that there's something you want from me that you're not getting,
Mm.
or you wouldn't be challenging me this way, that you were hoping that I was going to somehow meet your need you have, and I'm not meeting that. But I got to share with you, the way you're asking me to help you is not turning me on to help you. I'm struggling with this right now, and I really do want to help you, and I want to meet you. Can you tell me what's going on and what your frustration is right now? I want to hear about that, not the ideas you have about my ideas. Let's go. In 15 minutes, the guy was in a ball. He was crying because his relationship with his wife was going down the tube so fast because he would do with her exactly what he did with me. And we were able to look at that and explore it. I couldn't have done that 20 years ago when I was in Holland with that other person.
Right.
But, I was able to really use and see, that's the thing about this emotional sobriety. There's times when I can do that. I can turn around a situation that before would have totally been a disaster.
Well, like Paul Harvey would say, and the rest of the story, and I hadn't thought of it, but thank you for prompting it, is I saw about halfway through that I was building a tidal wave in front of me of resistance. So I just stopped and I said, something, the way I'm expressing myself is upsetting a lot of people here. And I'm really here to help. I'm not trying to sell you on anything. I'm not trying to teach you anything. I really just want to help. And I really apologize if I've offended anybody with my language, because they had made lots of comments about that.
Yeah.
But tell me how, I can best communicate with you. And one of the guys said, oh, Herb, you know what? You've come here, you've been highly recommended, you have a lot of credibility from the people who brought you in, and we know that, but we don't know who you are. Why don't you spend the next hour, next week, telling us your story and who you are, so that we can at least relate to where you're coming from.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was great.
Well,
what's
similar,
great is
because
they wanted to feel you,
yeah,
your ideas.
Yeah, well, because I'm coming mostly from here, of course.
Of course.
yeah.
Yeah.
But just as you did with the man that you're talking about, Alan, you made it much more personal.
Yeah.
With that guy, and this guy's asking you to do exactly the same thing with this group of guys, is make it much more personal rather than just about differences in ideas, right? So yeah.
I actually have been spending the last 3 days. I need to make it simpler. I need to make it much more, meet them where and Alan, you taught me that, meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
And listen, and what they're telling you is you're more important than the ideas, Herb.
Yeah.
That's the other piece that I think that you and I and Roger can forget at times.
Yeah.
Is that we got great, you're a very bright guy. Roger's incredibly bright. We all have value in that way, but who you are is so much more than just your ideas. Yeah. I've always felt that with you, and and Roger, I know that's how I felt about you all along. I mean, I respect you, but how you show up in your life, man, and who you are, that's what really defines both of you. Oh, wonderful. What a great conversation. I love this Thursday night meeting. It's my Christmas gift again this year. I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. You know, the first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. You know, we're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.